So, as someone who likes the bottoms up approach to business studies, which is what's done at many business schools, that is, we look at real situations, real companies, and try to determine and discern how specific business practices were applied. I thought that I would look into the turnaround of a couple of big computer companies that had their initial periods of success, followed by a decline, and then um, ultimately uh, ended up turning things around. The first of which was Microsoft. So here we're looking at Microsoft's stock price, and again, it started off small, and then it grew throughout the 90s. It was declined because of the um, dot-com crash and other factors because it did cease to innovate new products, and it flatlined for about a decade until about 2015 when things really uh, increased and changed for the better. So, what exactly happened and what trends can we analyze, and what can we take from this to apply to another case? So, it did start in 1975 with Allen and Gates. They were writing operating systems, and they were, one of the first software companies in the world. That is, they were willing to have their software, like DOS or Windows or um, later Microsoft Word and other softwares, put on any machine. Not just a hardware company, but a software company, and they felt with their licensing fees for every piece of software installed that they would be making more money that way. And um, things went well. They were even sued for antitrust violations because it was felt that they were using their dominant market position in Windows to suppress other internet browsers and favor Microsoft Internet Explorer. But although people did feel towards the end of the 90s that Bill Gates was a little bit distracted by his lawsuit, that he wasn't fully present in the C suite at Microsoft making decisions, his resignation um, led to the slow growth uh, and lack of success for many years. So when he resigned, Steve Ballmer took over, and he was an excellent salesperson. He had a lot of manic energy. He was very, very charismatic, and he was great at selling products. But he didn't really um, inspire um, the staff that he was managing. Bill Gates was a very analytical person, someone who could see a problem and identify solutions. Uh, Ballmer was more the salesperson. He could sell what was given to him, so he uh, was obsessed with Windows, but despite the fact there were new, um, technology like smartphones, like tablets, like other places that weren't necessarily a desktop computer, and that there were other ways to make money aside from an operating system, and not many new products were created with Steve Ballmer's leadership. It did become the largest company in the world, and its market cap at the time was $300 billion. It was the last year, 2002, that it was the richest company in the world until 2018. So, about a 16-year gap. Uh, what were some of the issues? Well, so here's Steve Ballmer at a Los Angeles Clippers press conference, and again, he'd be known for these annual shareholders meetings and these speeches where he admitted to drinking a whole bunch of coffee beforehand, and having all this energy and just screaming. But one thing that it did was it slowed down Internet Explorer purposefully. As Google was launching new apps like Docs and Sheets, uh, Microsoft felt that this would hurt sales of Office. And they didn't want people to switch to cloud based computing. Now, option one might have been, well, let's make Microsoft Office for the cloud and use that brand equity that Word and Excel have, and make products that operates similarly to Docs and Sheets. Um, but they didn't want to do that because the sale price of cloud-based, you know, apps was not very high, and they wanted the sale price they would get from selling a whole package of Microsoft Office. So they actually purposely slowed down Internet Explorer so that the Google Docs would not work as well on it. And as you might imagine, this just caused everyone to become annoyed with Internet Explorer, which seemed to be a poorly functioning browser. And many people would switch to something like Chrome or Firefox, even though you had to do extra installation because those browsers were just faster. So um, we did release a cloud computing platform called Azure in 2010, but they were always fighting with Windows. Like, do we want people to be using cloud computing or do we want them to be using desktop computing? And Windows and Azure would be fighting with each other. Whereas if you looked at it from the company's point of view, it shouldn't matter. Either one was a sale for Microsoft, whether you were doing the cloud or doing it on your desktop or your laptop. But these divisions of the company were fighting with each other. Um, and competing, and it'd be like they were very antagonistic. It was only until 2018 when um, the new CEO Satya Nadella put half of Windows in with Azure and the other half um, remained as it was, to focus on cloud computing and AI together. But for 8 years, they were competing with each other, and it was very bitter. So they then decided that they could introduce one way to turn things around would be to introduce subscriptions to Office instead of having people buy the software. The people could subscribe to it, and they would get Outlook and PowerPoint and Word and Excel and all the different types of software. They would get it, get a subscription, and um, this is actually good for business because when someone subscribes to a product, they tend not to unsubscribe. They stick with their default behavior. So if you uh, can convince someone to subscribe, it's so much easier to have them keep sending credit card payments than convincing them to go to the store and buy a new version of Office. There's this, the money stream is consistent, it's predictable, and people tend not to unsubscribe. Most people will not change subscriptions. So this was initially focused towards businesses, and then they expanded this to a revenue model for consumers as well. It finally built some software, some hardware when it launched the Surface tablet, and this allowed them to compete in that the mobile market, where there was a lot of revenue, where there was a lot of growth, and they could create software that was especially functional on their Surface tablet. But that was done in 2012. Again, I mentioned these announcements in 2010, 2011, 2012 because they had a whole 10 years where nothing significantly new was developed. So finally, Satya Nadella became the CEO in 2014. He really pushed growth mindset as a the idea that employees could improve over time and develop their skills. Ballmer was more into rank and yank or stacked evaluations where everyone in the company would be ranked from best to worst, or everyone in the division is ranked from best to worst. And this can be very, very competitive and combative. He really stresses more learning, and because that learning will lead to the innovation that is so key for a software company. And he initially there was a rivalry between Microsoft and Apple, but he looked as a way to have them partner together because Apple machines can run Microsoft software. Finally, they started using the Linux operating system. It was Windows or bust for so long, and now they start to consider other types of operating systems and other programming. There for so long they wanted to have a Windows operating system for a smartphone, but it wasn't working out on the focus. That was too narrow-minded. It was costing them sales, so they began being open to different types of operating systems, including Linux. So in the background here, you can see a little Linux penguin with the Microsoft logo on it. So finally launched Outlook for iPhone in 2015, and just increased these partnerships because they were to partner with as many people as possible would be a win for Microsoft. There's no need to think about the past, or because if you can get your Outlook or your Microsoft software on as many devices as possible, that's a win. They started also acquiring things. Ballmer was known for trying to buy Nokia and trying to integrate it so that Microsoft could make phones, and it never worked out, and a lot of money was lost. So they started making more selective acquisitions that fit the brand, that would complement their offerings. So they sell a lot of business software. Why not have the networking software, LinkedIn, be a part of their offerings? They finally stopped the Windows Phone because Android and iOS just dominated the smartphone operating system. They were too big. It was a monopoly. There was just no way to get people to use the Windows Phone. It was a losing battle. They realized that it was no longer worth it, so they discontinued the Windows Phone to focus on other products that Android and iOS users could buy. Then finally, it became the world's most valuable company again. Shares trading in 2018 at $110 each, and the market cap is $851. So that is a big increase over the $300 billion when it was most valuable in 2002, and now at market cap it is at about 1.4 trillion, and that's just going up as more people are working from home and they need more of these business-to-business technological solutions. More recent news, no major new products, but just refining their existing offerings. Windows never had the best reputation for quality and reliability, so businesses want reliable products that they can count on. So by improving the reliability of Windows, led more people, especially businesses in the B2B market, to buy it. So you can see now Microsoft is added as one of the biggest companies in the world, and when you compare it to Microsoft and Amazon and Alphabet and Apple, you can see that for the longest period of time it was such a small slice, little yellow line here, and then it's getting bigger and bigger, and just since Nadella took over, his ideas really generated a lot of sales and made a very, very big difference. So when they stopped looking at what had been successful in the past, which had been Windows and Office, and they start looking towards what do people need and what can we offer that meets those needs, things really changed. Here are some sources. Here's how he might have changed their culture.
Hi, I'm Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft. We need to create the necessary condition to live our mission by working on our culture. You join here not to be cool, but to make others cool. That's kind of how I say it. So one of the things that happens when you're super successful is you sort of sometimes lose touch with what made you successful in the first place. I felt like, we may have sort of confused maybe marketing slogans for our mission. So that's why I wanted to get back to that sense of purpose. It's been 5 years now that we've done this. It's called the 1 week, which is in some sense the metaphor for the 1 week that then informs the rest of the year. In terms of really getting in touch with the core of this company around innovation. But that innovation being driven by a sense of purpose and reinforcing a culture that we aspire to.
Okay, but the implication from your book is that Microsoft, I won't say the word broken, but that there were some serious problems here. And that's what I'm trying to get at. What was it that was so concerning to you?
So if anything, I wanted to not sort of talk about what is broken. I wanted to go back to the very genesis of this company. What was that sense of purpose and drive that made us successful? What was the culture that have been there in the very beginning or in the times when we were able to achieve that success? How do we recapture it? So that's why I think about it as, it's the Renaissance as much as about sort of just fixing something that's broken.
So there was a sense of culture, sense of purpose that was lost or missing to you.
I felt in '92, we used to talk about even our mission, for example, as having a PC in every home and every desk.
Right.
Very concrete, in something that was able to galvanize the entire company, except by the end of the decade itself, we more or less had achieved it. Bill had been working on that for a long time, and Steve and others had worked on it for a long time. I joined much later since their beginning, and then we achieved it. Then what? What's next? We're at a time in 2018 when technology is so pervasive in our lives, in our economies, in our societies. And I think time has come, quite frankly, for us to really have the dialogue and the question to be asked as well as answered as to what is the real benefits of technology broadly, equitably spread, not only in our country, in our society, but all over the world.
You were quoted as saying that you're a HoloLens user, that you get up every morning and use it and to check your schedule. Can you talk a little bit about the promise of AR? There's a lot of hype around AR, and VR has not gotten the uptake in the market. What is the promise of AR to you?
There's multiple forms. For example, VR and AR to me is one continuum. It's like a dial for whether it's fully opaque and it's fully immersive, or you can see the world and you can see the objects, which is digital objects and artifacts on top of it. That's AR. HoloLens, for example, is really gotten traction in a lot of enterprise and industrial settings, remote work, so remote assisted. So you say you're a factory worker and you're trying to fix something, hands-free, but you need the expert to come tell you what to do. Like HoloLens is the perfect form factor. Training, it's a perfect form factor for doing simulation. But the most interesting thing is data visualization, the ability to spin around data, to be able to learn about the patterns. And in fact, with all the big data, I always say, it's the ability to recognize small patterns that's still uniquely human. And I think there's a real use case there. And then I think gaming will also have use cases.
When you took over, and you wrote this in your book, you said that culture and fixing the culture was your top priority. And I was curious, and I believe you even said that the C in CEO should stand for culture. You've been at Microsoft for more than 2 decades. Why was that your number one priority? Why was it so concerning? And that was the first thing you felt you had to fix?
In fact, I would say, Connie, 2 things. One is the sense of purpose and mission. And culture, to me, are the 2 pillars, which I think for any institution, any organization, are the enduring pillars. And then, of course, you have to express yourself with changing technology, in our case, technology paradigms, every year, because that's constantly changing.
You were very candid in your book talking about how you misanswered a question at the Grace Hopper Institute. And the question was by Maria asking you, what advice do you give to a woman who wants to ask for a raise?
It's not really about asking for the raise, but knowing and having faith that the system will actually give you the right raises as you go along.
So I'd like to do a reset. Let's rewind the tape. Satya, what advice do you give a woman today?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of what I said, what my big learning from there was, which I wrote in the book, and obviously Maria helped me, and many other women subsequently have helped me understand, because the answer I gave was absolutely nonsensical, because it really did not get to the core context.
But I'm asking, what's your advice to women?
I think they should, first of all, advocate for themselves. They should find other allies, male or female, who can advocate for them, and make sure that they don't accept status quo. I think that that's definitely the first response. And then the responsibility of people like me, who are leaders of organizations, is to be able to listen to women who are advocating for themselves or their allies, and make sure we don't have to even put them in that situation.
So what is the vibe or image of Microsoft that you want the world to know? Because there's a very specific vibe out there.
That's right. It's in our mission. Like, it's empowering. So I want Microsoft any association with this company should be, they put some tool, they put some platform, they gave me the opportunity to really do something.
So not cool.
Well, that, to me, you want to be cool by doing that empowerment, but not just to be able to sort of associate yourself with cool technology. It's the result that matters.
So, I think he covered an interesting dilemma. What do you do when you have achieved your mission statement? So they have a mission statement in the 90s, Microsoft on every computer in every home, and then they achieve it. Then what next? They spend 10 years trying to figure out what next, what's the new product. And now they're taking a very, very innovative, innovation-focused stance with the hackathon, getting into AR, finding that next innovation. So you can't congratulate yourself for achieving your mission statement. You have to think, what next? So likewise, Apple, sometimes partner, sometimes rival of Microsoft, has had some issues where they lost a lot of their market share, where they struggled and they had to turn things around. And they may even be struggling at the moment with Tim Cook. So here we can see their market cap, and it began in the 80s and 90s, it flatlined, and then when Steve Jobs rejoined the company in the late 90s, it started to grow again. Now some are a little concerned, what's happening now? Has it flatlined? What is not flatlined, just flattened out, plateaued? And what are the new products? What's the next big Apple invention that's going to galvanize all those users out there and drive sales? So it was founded in 1976, similar to Apple. We had Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak. They had a home computing club. They worked at Atari, they worked at HP, and they made the Apple 1 and 2, which were the sort of first personal computer designs. It was from a very, very hobbyist point of view. The people who wanted computers, there was a niche market. They were meeting in garages. There were clubs. It was not a viable market segment at the moment. But then computers were for business. Steve Jobs thought, what if we could have computers for every person? If people felt like they could have a computer in their home to assist them. And they created the Macintosh. It was very, very successful. It was very, very easy to use. But they had trouble following it up. They had another computer, the Linda, the next version of the Macintosh. These computers were struggling. They may have been too expensive. They may not have offered products that people wanted. And they struggled with the overall visions of the company. The future iterations after the first successful Macintosh fell below expectations. There was a new CEO. Steve Jobs clashed with John Sculley and was fired in 1985. So what did he do? Well, he still had his shares, so he bought Pixar. and it was spun off from Industrial Light and Magic, and they began producing the animation effects for films, and then they eventually produced their own films. He launched NXT Computer. It was supposed to be a new computer. It was like a black cube. It was very, very artistic, uh, but it was not. It did have some computing power that was useful. Like the technology did work, but there wasn't really a market for it at that price point. Nobody wanted a computer that was that powerful and especially that expensive at their home, and it only sold 50,000 units per year. And although it put some good technology on the market, it was not a successful commercial product. So Pixar released Toy Story in 1995. It put the studio back on the map, and it was sort of confirmed that this flyer Steve Jobs had taken on the company was successful. Um, and he had these small successes that rebuilt his reputation, and eventually Steve Jobs returned to Apple after 12 years of losses. Steve Jobs purchased NXT. Excuse me. Apple purchased NXT, so Steve Jobs returned as an interim CEO. He did different things. They were trying to um, push this product called Newton, which one could look at now in retrospect and see, well, this was the first tablet. You had this stylus, and you could take notes and call people. Well, you couldn't call people yet, but the idea was it would be like your assistant. You'd look up their phone number, then you would call them, then you'd take notes during the meeting, and so on. And that was a big money loser. The tech recognition software never quite worked properly, but the idea was to have a computer that was portable, which, as the smartphones has shown, has worked. So he then agreed to partner with Microsoft right away, which gave them $150 million by developing Office for Apple. He launched the iMac in 1998, another computer that looked very visually appealing, that could, families would want to own because it looked fun. The whole CPU was combined into the monitor, and it resonated with the consumer market. Also, he tried to simplify the company's product line. Instead of having multiple versions in multiple categories, he wanted one desktop for the average user, one desktop for professionals, one laptop for the average user, one laptop for professionals, and having four instead of a whole dozen products made it simple. And he hired at this time Jony Ive, who was someone who helped create that signature Apple look that still exists today. They introduced the iPod in 2001, and this again changed how people interacted with technology to have more songs on MP3 players instead of a disc or a tape or a record. Then he really disrupted the music market. So initially, music producers were suing the services that allowed you to download MP3s, and because it would hurt album sales. But iTunes really changed that market, because instead of just buying a whole album, why not buy just the songs that you want? Why not, if people are going to download music, why not make it easy for them to do so and pay the artist $1.99 per song, or 99 cents, or $9.99 for an album? If they don't have to produce the whole album and make it as a hard copy with artwork and so on, they might be able to lower the costs and give more money to the artists themselves. So they switched to Intel processors, and then this really improved the speed of their computers, because they would look nice, but they actually didn't perform as well as they could have. Launched the iPhone in 2007, combining a laptop with an iPod, and again just changed how we interacted with technology. BlackBerry had a keyboard but a small visual display, and people very much preferred the iPhone visual display. Extending that to an iPad in 2010. Apple shares at $300 is just creating multiple revenue streams at the moment. Fortunately, he passed away the year afterwards, and one issue has been, has the company lost some creativity? It has released the iWatch, but that's sort of an iPhone or an iPad on a wrist watch. What's the next big thing that Apple is going to do? And that's what Tim Cook has been criticized for, is that sales have been a little shorter than expectations. They rely on things like the holiday season, but what's the new product that they're going to create? Here's a bit of Steve Jobs as described by Bill Gates.
When you started at Microsoft, you were so young. This was something that was just a passion. You once said to me, which I thought was a fascinating point, you never thought of yourself as an entrepreneur. If you hadn't been doing computers, it's not like you would have started a chain of restaurants. This was about computers and your passion. Did you ever think to yourself, this is the kind of manager I want to be?
Yeah, over time, as you're writing less code and you're hiring people who write code, and then you're hiring people who manage people who write code, and you're explaining to the world why the magic of the personal computer and the magic of software can help them get things done, you really are forced to say, do I enjoy this? Am I good at this? Should I have someone else do it? In most cases, the founder doesn't stick around for 25 years and end up managing 50,000 people. That's a fairly unusual case, but it's a nice case because you have a certain continuity. Nobody ever wondered, okay, who's in charge here? Bill wrote this in a memo. I wonder what somebody else thinks. No, if I wrote it, then, hey, let's just go do it.
You were famously a very demanding person who suffered fools not very gladly. You pushed people very hard. Do you think that was the best way to motivate people?
Well, I think it's important to separate out. I didn't, other than a DOJ deposition I gave, no one ever said that when I went out and talked to the press or customers that I was, rude or abrupt or commanding or anything like that. Inside Microsoft, we had to some degree a self-selected set of people who, were mostly males, I'll admit. And yes, we were pretty tough on each other. And I think sometimes that went too far. It was very intense. We counted on each other to work very long hours. And I, always wanted to set the best example of that. I think that intensity, even though a little bit it went too far, was great for my 20s, 30s, 40s. And now, where I'm a bit more mellow and I'm not pushing quite as insanely, but I'm still clear about, hey, that toilet design's too expensive. It's a dead end. We're not going to put more money into that. Works for being the co-head of the foundation.
Do you think there are leadership rules, principles? Because I sometimes wonder, if you were to ask somebody what's a good way to run a company, they would probably put down a list of 10 things, and Steve Jobs would have violated all 10 of those in the way he, or at least a vast majority of those in the way he ran Apple. And yet, it's the largest company in the world today. Is it just too specific or varied for there to be general lessons?
Well, Steve, that's a good example of don't do this at home. That is, it's really easy to imitate the bad parts of Steve, of at times being an and it is, I have yet to meet any person who, in terms of picking talent, hyper-motivating that talent, and having a sense of design of, oh, this is good, this is not good. So he brought some incredibly positive things along with that toughness. And I always said that I was like a minor wizard because he would be casting spells and I would see people mesmerized. But because I'm a minor wizard, the spells don't work on me. I could not cast those spells. But I'd see them and I would say, hey, wait, don't. You're going to work even more than I would ask you to. This is crazy. Or like when you did the Next introduction, which is a computer that completely failed. It was such nonsense, and yet he mesmerized those people. Oh, yes, million by a million and black cube and all this stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, that spell should not work at all. It doesn't have any reality to it. So Steve is a very singular case where the company really was on a path to die, and it goes and becomes the most valuable company in the world with some products that are really quite amazing. That there aren't going to be many stories like that.
So just some of Bill Gates's ideas that there was some parts of Steve Jobs that were a bit aggressive, and sometimes he adds even it's easier to copy the bad parts than the good parts, which were to create good ideas and to motivate very talented people. Anyway, so here are the sources for the Apple article and some examples of how both Microsoft and Apple succeeded, fell on tough times, and then succeeded again.